Part 1. The stage lights at the stadium dimmed to a deep, resonant indigo, casting long, dramatic shadows across the vast sea of glowing army bombs that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a moment suspended in time, the kind of quiet before a storm where 50,000 hearts beat as one. Jungkook stood near the center stage, his silhouette framed by the cool, ethereal glow of the massive LED screens overhead. For a performer who had grown up in front of the world, whose adolescence and early adulthood were documented in stadiums, music videos, and late-night broadcasts from Seoul to Los Angeles and New York, composure was second nature. Yet tonight, the heavy stillness in the air felt different. It was pregnant with unsaid emotions, carrying the unmistakable weight of a chapter closing, and an infinite unknown future waiting to be written. As the opening notes of a familiar, haunting piano melody began to drift through the open-air venue, a collective gasp rippled through the front rows. This was not just another tour stop. This was the culmination of years of sweat, tears, unyielding dedication, and a brotherhood that had redefined modern pop culture on a global scale. Jungkook lowered his microphone, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep, shaky breath that betrayed the ironclad facade he usually maintained for his fans. In that single, vulnerable second, the distance between the global superstar and the young man from Busan dissolved completely. The massive screens caught the exact tremor in his lower lip, and across the stadium, thousands of fans collectively held their breath, sensing that the emotional dam was about to break. Behind the scenes, the dressing room was a sanctuary of quiet reflection for the other members who had already completed their intense solo sets or were preparing for the grand finale. Namjoon sat in a corner with his notebook, his fingers tracing the edges of pages filled with lyrics that had guided millions through their darkest hours. Yoongi adjusted his jacket in front of the vanity mirror, his expression stoic, yet his eyes revealing the profound, inspoken pride of an older brother who had watched them all grow from anxious trainees into legends. Hoseok stood near the doorway, stretching his muscles while softly humming the rhythm of their earliest choreography, keeping the energy grounded. Jimin and Taehyung shared a quiet nod across the room, in telepathic communication born from a decade of sleeping in the same cramped dorms and sharing every triumph and breakdown. And though Jin was currently stationed miles away, fulfilling his mandatory military service obligations that had temporarily altered the rhythm of their lives, his presence in the room was as palpable as if he were standing right beside them. The bond holding BTS together has never been a manufactured corporate strategy. It is a living, breathing organism forged in the fires of near failure, relentless pressure, and shared dreams. When they debuted years ago under a small debt-ridden agency with no industry clout, nobody believed they would survive the brutal landscape of K-pop, let alone conquer the Billboard charts and address the United Nations. They had only each other. In those early days, eating meager meals in a tiny studio apartment and practicing until their feet bled, Jungkook was just a shy 15-year-old high school student who barely spoke a word to anyone outside the practice room. It was Jin, the eldest, who fried eggs for him, drove him to school, and wiped away his homesick tears when the reality of trainee life became too heavy to bear. Jin became the emotional anchor of the group, using self-deprecating humor and quiet acts of service to hold the fragile ecosystem of 7 distinct personalities together. Now, years later, that dynamic had evolved into an unbreakable brotherhood, but the physical absence of their eldest Hung had left a profound void that every member felt daily. Jin's enlistment marked the beginning of a mandatory hiatus for the group as a collective, forcing each member to step into the solo spotlight and confront the daunting prospect of standing entirely on their own. Jungkook, despite his astronomical success as a global solo artist with record-breaking chart entries and stadium sellouts, had frequently spoken about the crushing weight of performing without his brothers standing shoulder to shoulder with him on stage. The stage feels too wide, the dressing room's too quiet, and the victory's bittersweet when shared over a FaceTime call rather than a late-night celebratory meal. The tension in the stadium reached its absolute zenith, as a production assistant nervously handed a heavy, cream-colored envelope to the main stage director, who quickly relayed it to the side of the stage. Word traveled fast through the ear monitor network, and the subtle shift in the crew's demeanor telegraphed that something extraordinary was about to unfold. This was not part of the standard set list. This was an unscripted, highly guarded surprise orchestrated behind the scenes by Jin himself, who, despite his strict military schedule, had managed to coordinate with the production team to deliver a message that would stop time. JUNGKOOK looked toward the wings of the stage, his eyes locking onto the glowing red tally light of the camera as the envelope was placed on a pedestal right beside him. The crowd sensed the shift immediately, the roaring cheers gradually subsiding into an intense, expectant hush that swept across the venue like a wave. The camera zoomed in tight on JUNGKOOK's face, capturing every nuance of his expression as he slowly stepped toward the pedestal. His hand hovered over the envelope for a long moment, trembling slightly under the weight of anticipation. Every army watching live in the stadium, and the millions more streaming the concert across digital platforms worldwide, realized that this moment was going to alter the emotional landscape of the evening permanently. The air grew thick with emotion, and the digital chat rooms exploded into a frenzy of speculation, emojis, and frantic messages as fans braced themselves for what was inside. With a deep breath that sounded like a sigh of surrender to his emotions, JUNGKOOK slipped his finger under the wax seal and slid the heavy card out of the envelope. The paper was crisp, bearing the official crest of the military division where Jin was currently serving, yet it also carried the unmistakable, messy handwriting of the eldest member, a handwriting that every BTS member and dedicated fan could recognize blindfolded. As JUNGKOOK's eyes scanned the first few lines, the color visibly drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming flush of raw, unfiltered emotion. The mask of the untouchable pop icon slipped away, revealing the young man who missed his hung more than words could ever possibly express. The silence in the stadium was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant hum of the audio equipment, and the sharp intake of breath from fans in the front rows who could see the sudden sheen of moisture gathering in JUNGKOOK's dark, expressive eyes. Jin's letters were legendary among the members, often blending sharp, sarcastic humor with profound, deeply moving wisdom that could make you laugh and cry in the same breath. But this letter was different. It carried the solemnity of distance, the passage of time, and the unbreakable promise of a reunion that the entire fandom had been counting down to with bated breath. As JUNGKOOK tried to steady his vocal cords to read the words aloud to the roaring ocean of fans, his voice cracked on the very first syllable, signaling the beginning of an unforgettable, emotional journey. The acoustic resonance of JUNGKOOK's trembling voice echoed through the massive open-air venue as he began to read Jin's handwritten letter, turning an ordinary concert into a historic milestone of emotional transparency. The words penned by their eldest Hung were not merely a greeting. They were a masterclass in psychological grounding and brotherly devotion. Jin wrote of the freezing winter mornings at the military base, waking up before dawn, and how the only thing keeping him warm during the grueling physical training was the thought of standing on this exact stage with his 6 brothers once again. He reminded JUNGKOOK of the day he first arrived in Seoul as a terrified teenager carrying a single duffel bag, emphasizing how immensely proud he was to watch that same boy transform into a global phenomenon who commanded stadiums with effortless grace. As JUNGKOOK read the passage where Jin playfully scolded him for not eating his vegetables and jokingly demanded that JUNGKOOK take better care of his Haeyoungs even in his absence, a bittersweet laughter rippled through the stadium. But that laughter was short-lived, instantly overtaken by a profound wave of sorrow as the letter transitioned into a deeply serious reflection on the trials they had all faced together. Jin reminded everyone, the members backstage, the crew, and the millions watching through screens across the globe, that no matter how far their solo endeavors took them, their roots were inextricably tangled in the soil they had tilled together. The camera panned backstage, capturing Namjoon wiping away a stray tear with the back of his hand, while Jimin buried his face in a towel, completely overwhelmed by the collective weight of their shared history. This powerful display of vulnerability is precisely what separates BTS from every other musical act in contemporary history, cementing a connection with their audience that transcends language, culture, and geography. In an industry often dominated by manufactured perfection and polished emotionless facades, BTS has built an empire on the radical premise of imperfection and shared pain. When JUNGKOOK finally broke down completely, covering his face with his hands as his shoulders shook with silent sobs, he wasn't just crying for Jin. He was crying for the immense pressure of their journey, the grueling sacrifices required to stay at the top, and the sheer relief of knowing that his brothers, all 7 of them, past, present, and future, remained an unbreakable unit against the crushing forces of the world. The small detail hidden within the letter, a subtle, deeply personal reference known only to the members and the most dedicated historians of the fandom, was the catalyst that changed the entire emotional trajectory of the night. It was a mention of an old, battered guitar string from their pre-debut underground days in Nanyang, a symbol of a time when they had nothing to their names except a shared dream and a battered instrument that constantly went out of tune. Jin wrote that whenever that string snapped, they would simply tie it back together and keep playing, because the music mattered more than the perfection of the equipment. That single metaphor dismantled any lingering anxiety about the future of the group. It was an undeniable, rock-solid guarantee that their upcoming reunion wasn't just a distant corporate milestone, but an inevitable homecoming. Across the globe, social media algorithms registered an unprecedented spike in engagement, with millions of posts analyzing every single word of the letter, every tremor in Jungkook's voice, and every tear shed by the members backstage. Content creators, reaction channels, and international news outlets immediately seized upon the broadcast, driving click-through rates and viewership metrics to astronomical highs as the hashtag dominated global trending topics within minutes. The emotional resonance of the moment captured the exact zeitgeist of modern digital culture, a deep, aching hunger for authentic human connection in an increasingly digital and isolated world. Armies mobilized instantly, not just to consume the media, but to organize global support campaigns, trending celebratory hashtags, and virtual spaces of comfort for fellow fans who were equally overcome by the broadcast. Back on stage, Jungkook slowly lowered the letter, taking a long, shuddering breath as he wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his oversized jacket. The deafening roar of the crowd returned with a vengeance, not as a polite applause, but as a thunderous, earth-shaking wave of love and solidarity that enveloped the entire stadium. Thousands of purple lights swayed in unison, painting the night sky in the signature color of a fandom that had promised to walk beside BTS through every storm, every hiatus, and every triumph. Jungkook stepped forward to the very edge of the stage, ignoring the production cues, and looked directly into the primary camera lens, his tear-streaked face broadcasting to every corner of the earth. With a voice still thick with emotion, Jungkook delivered a short, impromptu message to his absent Hung and his beloved brothers. Speaking for all 7 members at once, he promised that they would endure the wait, that they would return stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before, and that the music they would create together in the future would make every single tear shed tonight entirely worthwhile. The backstage monitor showed Namjoon, Yoongi, Hoseok, Jimin, and Taehyung all standing up, locking arms in their traditional pre-show huddle, a powerful visual confirmation that even miles apart, the 7 members were breathing the same air and sharing the same heartbeat. As the final chords of the concert swelled through the speakers, signaling the end of the monumental broadcast, the screen faded slowly to black, leaving millions of viewers sitting in the quiet glow of their devices, profoundly moved by a narrative of brotherhood that defied distance, time, and circumstance. The stream ended, but the conversation had only just begun, setting the stage for a new era in pop music history where vulnerability is the ultimate strength and brotherhood is the only currency that truly matters. Part 1. The neon lights of the massive stadium illuminated the humid summer night air, casting a brilliant violet glow over the tens of thousands of screaming fans who had traveled from every corner of the earth to witness history. Following their earth-shattering performance at the global stage of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, and the unprecedented global dominance of their blockbuster reunion album Era Rang, BTS was once again redefining what it meant to rule the international music landscape. Yet beneath the triumphant roar of the crowd and the blinding flashes of media cameras, an intense undercurrent of raw, unfiltered emotion charged the atmosphere. Tonight's concert was different. It carried the heavy, bittersweet resonance of a group that had survived the ultimate test of time, military service, and geographical separation, only to face new, systemic boundaries within the global industry. Standing near the edge of the extended runway, Jungkook stared out into the endless sea of purple lights, his silhouette sharply outlined against the massive LED displays, broadcasting his every move to millions streaming worldwide. The immense success of their recent milestones, from breaking records on the Billboard charts to making headlines with their bold, unified stand against exclusionary award categories, had proven that their cultural footprint was untouchable. Yet, the physical demands of the massive world tour and the lingering shadows of the years spent apart had left the members deeply reflective. Jungkook gripped his in-ear monitor, his chest rising and falling heavily as the opening notes of a melancholic, unreleased ballad began to drift through the open-air venue, signaling that the scripted flow of the concert was about to take an unexpected turn backstage. The VIP green room was an ecosystem of intense, quiet solidarity. Sat in front of a sleek vanity mirror, his fingers resting on a printed copy of the group's recent joint statement that had sent shockwaves through the global entertainment industry. The decision to bypass the upcoming Grammy consideration, following the controversial introduction of regional categorization, was a testament to their unwavering artistic integrity, a unified declaration that their music belonged on the universal main stage, not confined to a separate box. Beside him, Suga adjusted his jacket with calm precision, his eyes showing the quiet, protective pride of an older brother who had helped build this legacy from a cramped basement studio in Nanyang. J-Hope paced slowly near the entrance, softly humming complex vocal harmonies to keep his nervous energy grounded, while Jimin and Taehyung shared a quiet, knowing look across the room, bound by a decade of shared trauma, triumphs, and unbreakable brotherhood. Though Jin was currently thousands of miles away, managing overseas commitments and final preparations for their next collective milestone, his presence in the room was absolute. The dynamic of BTS has never been dictated by temporary physical proximity. It is a living brotherhood forged in the fires of near failure and astronomical pressure. In the early days, when the agency was on the verge of bankruptcy and public indifference threatened to crush their dreams before they even began, it was Jin who acted as the emotional glue of the dorms. He cooked meager meals for a teenage Jungkook, drove him to high school, and silently swallowed his own frustrations so the younger trainees wouldn't see him break. That foundation of absolute trust and self-sacrificing love is what transformed 7 ordinary young men into global legends. Now, with the entire group reunited under the banner of their historic comeback, the emotional stakes were higher than ever. Every performance, every camera angle, and every lyric carried the weight of a narrative that transcended pop music. The massive screen suddenly shifted from live concert footage to a quiet, sepia-toned graphic carrying an official high-priority notification from the backstage production crew. A heavy, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a thick red wax stamp, was being hand-delivered directly to the main stage by a trusted staff member. The stadium's sensors picked up the sudden shift in collective energy, and the roaring crowd gradually transitioned into an intense, breathless hush that rippled across the entire venue. Within seconds, Jungkook turned slowly around, his eyes locking onto the messenger carrying the envelope. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing the subtle tremor in his hands as the object was placed gently on a velvet-lined pedestal next to his microphone stand. Every single person in the stadium, along with the millions of armies glued to their screens across digital platforms, immediately sensed that this unscripted moment was going to alter the emotional landscape of the evening forever. The chat rooms exploded into a frenzy of digital speculation, emojis, and frantic warnings as fans realized this was not a routine segment of the show, but a deeply personal intervention orchestrated from afar. With a deep, shaky breath that betrayed his usual ironclad composure on stage, Jungkook stepped toward the pedestal. His fingers hovered over the heavy paper stock for a long, agonizing moment before he carefully broke the wax seal and slid out a thick, handwritten letter. The handwriting was instantly recognizable to every member and longtime fan. It was Jin's distinct, messy yet intensely comforting penmanship. As Jungkook's eyes scanned the opening lines, the color visibly drained from his face, replaced by an instantaneous, overwhelming flush of raw emotion. The untouchable global pop icon vanished in an instant, leaving only the young man who missed his eldest hung with a depth that words could scarcely capture. The stadium was wrapped in a profound absolute silence, broken only by the faint hum of high-powered audio equipment and the sharp intake of breath from fans in the front rows who could see the sudden sheen of moisture gathering in Jungkook's dark, expressive eyes. Jin's letters had always possessed a rare, disarming power, effortlessly blending sharp, self-deprecating wit with profound, emotionally grounding wisdom that could shatter a room's composure. But this letter carried a different frequency. It was saturated with the heavy passage of time, the undeniable scars of their shared struggles, and the fierce, protective love of an older brother watching from a distance as his youngest member carried the immense weight of the world on his shoulders.